My name is Gail Weisswasser. I'm one of the co-owners of Wonderland Books. My other partner over there is Amy Joyce, who's waving right now. So if you've been to Wonderland before, and I do recognize a lot of faces, welcome back. And if you've never been to Wonderland before, welcome. I'm very happy to have you here tonight on this very, very sweltering summer night. So tonight we're going to hear from Johnisha Levi, who was born and raised in Washington, D.C. and has been a development professional for social impact nonprofits, a former litigation attorney, and a culinarian. Johnisha graduated from Harvard University, New York University School of Law, and Johnson & Wales University. Her writing has appeared in Yes Media, Wildsem, The Kitchen, and Northern Virginia Magazine. In her free time, she is an avid reader of literary nonfiction, African American history, and contemporary literature by authors of color. She currently lives in Nashville, Tennessee with her husband John, and Numbers Up is her first book. Tonight, Johnisha will be in conversation with Leila Buck. Leila is a Lebanese-American playwright, actor, facilitator, and educator. She's written numerous plays and has performed and taught in more than 20 Arab and European countries and throughout the United States. Her plays include American Dreams, which draws attention to the difficult process of becoming a citizen in the U.S., In the Crossing, and The Kiwi. Did I say that correctly?
Yeah.
Okay. An artist in residence for Wesleyan University's Doris Duke Foundation Building Bridges grant, Leila created interactive work around the misrepresentation of Muslims in the U.S. and received the Edgar Beckham Social Justice Award in 2015. So we're very excited to hear from them tonight. We do have the books here if you'd like to purchase them. Johnisha will be signing them afterwards at the table up there, and enjoy.
Johnisha and I talked before this a little bit, but we also are going to be in flow with your questions. We're going to first start with some questions that we talked about, and then we will move into some questions from you all, and you'll get to then get your books and get them signed. So Johnisha, I just want to first say, this book, for those of you who haven't read it, it is so courageous, and it is so compassionate, and it is so compelling. And I just want to name, I wrote them down because there are just a few things about it for those that haven't had a chance to read it yet that I want to name. It explores many layers of family, how we define it, what we will do for it. Johnisha examines and interrogates systemic racism and its relationship to policing, incarceration, and both domestic and systemic violence against Black bodies in this country. She also weaves a lot of DC history with a focus on both local and national systems of racism in policing, incarceration, housing, and beyond. And I'm going to read one section for those who haven't had a chance to read the book yet, which feels really rich in posing some of the central questions of your amazing work. So I'm going to awkwardly find that page, which I marked, but I'm juggling mics and things. Okay, so let me make sure, yes, I'm going to put that down, and then we'll do this. What really compelled Steven Tyler to become a drummer? Was it fated by something embedded in his subconscious, or was it all just wondrous serendipity? What proclivities do our forebears, our genes, and our unique family histories, even if unknown, imprint on us? Is it synaptic? Is it passed on in the dreams we forget? Do our fathers and our mothers whisper secrets to us while we slumber? How, we ask ourselves, do we end up here? How do we become the people we are? What compels us to choose how we spend our days? Why are we motivated to do the things we do? As a young law student, I, Johnisha, worked with an inmate on Alabama's death row. And as I gradually built a rapport with my client, it dawned on me that he was my father's "here but for the grace of God" incarnation. Almost 20 years later, this connection is even more apparent. During my time in Alabama, I started to comprehend for the first time how structural, systemic, and institutional racism often determines a person's opportunities, or lack thereof, responses, and choices, leaving me with the following questions. When a person commits a deplorable act, how much weight is assigned to the individual versus the culture? Where does that leave those of us who are directly impacted by the act in question? How is this calculus affected when the offender is a loved one? It's just one of many beautiful passages of this book. And so just kind of from those words, I'm just going to start with a really basic question, which is, which knowing you will not have a basic response, what inspired you to write Numbers Up?
Can you hear me? Just testing out. Yeah, so Numbers Up actually was a book that basically called me to write it. I had been doing some personal writing after both my parents had passed away. They passed away in 2013 and 2015, and the grieving process was long, and as all you know who have lost dear loved ones, it's not a straightforward process, and sometimes you think you're doing okay, and then other times not so much. And I was sort of at that point where I was starting to kind of lose some of the sense impressions and just little everyday things about my parents, and you know, the sound of their voices, or you know, small mannerisms or little jokes that they would tell, little quirks. And so I kind of just wanted to start getting that down on paper for myself. But it wasn't really, you know, anything. I was just kind of experimenting, and it was just supposed to be for me. But during the strange days of the pandemic, some unexpected things happen, and you have a lot of time to fill. And for those of you who have read, the book starts off because I talk about a piece of paper that I just came upon. I had all these, you know, bags and files and different things that my mom had collected over the years, and I really just didn't have time to sort through them. I had looked at some things, but a lot of stuff had just kind of moved with me to Nashville, and then just kind of sat in like our spare room on the floor for a while. So I think we were trying to make room for some exercise equipment, and I was going through stuff, and I found this piece of paper with which ended up being my dad's parole paper. And you know, my dad had spent a short amount of time in prison at Lorton, but it was not something that he talked about with me. It was known to my older siblings because they were around at that time. They have vivid memories of it. But for my parents, it was almost like they wanted to give me this different origin story. And they wanted me to, I don't think it was that they were ashamed of it, but they just wanted to move past it. And I think a lot of times with certain generations, you know, my dad was from the greatest generation, my mom was a pre-baby boomer. You experienced a lot of really difficult things, but you just internalized them and you moved on with your life, and you didn't want to like spend all this time analyzing it and having your kids ask you questions about things. So I came upon this paper, and it just kind of really, I don't know, it's like you're looking, you know, straight on, and then all of a sudden the world kind of turns this way, and it just hit me that this is something that is bigger than just like a little bit of writing. And so that sort of, you know, put me on the journey to write this book.
And you know, you use the word bigger, and one of the things that I find the most beautiful in the book is the way that you are telling these deeply intimate, very personal, specific stories about your own family, but throughout you are always weaving the connections to these larger issues and larger shared experiences on a lot of levels in DC, particularly within the Black community, but also looking at systems of racism, of poverty, of, you know, historic and systemic injustice, and how they impact these seemingly very personal actions and stories. And you also weave in all these threads of specific references and research into that history. And you talk about the role of law in your life and in your work and in your studies. And I wonder if you could talk about sort of how you came to that process of weaving in those personal and those larger questions, and maybe also a little bit about the work you did with Bryan Stevenson, if you want, or just, you know, how that experience with carceral litigation in particular and documentation sort of connects to your work. There's a lot of things in one, but feel free to pop in anywhere there.
I love that question. Really, you know, when I was deciding on law schools, shortly before that, so I had been working as a paralegal at this firm, and I really didn't expect to go to law school. My dad always wanted to be a lawyer. I think for a long time as a kid, I wanted to be a doctor. But I really, you know, kind of gravitated towards humanities in college, and I was better at humanities. Hard sciences were really a struggle for me. And I just, I really enjoyed that process of kind of immersing yourself in like another world, and, you know, analyzing characters and motive and all that stuff. So while I was working at the law firm, I really got interested in this. It was this book called May God Have Mercy, and it was about the Roger Keith Coleman, you know, death penalty case, and about the work that this lawyer at a large firm in DC did. And, you know, it just, I don't know, it really gripped me. I don't know what it is about criminal justice, but it's something that really resonates with me, the work, maybe because, as you read in the passage, there is something that you can't really name that is in you, where you know things that maybe you don't know. And so maybe, you know, there was some part of me that felt that connection to that work because of what, you know, my family had gone through. And, you know, going to law school was not, socially it was fun because I met a lot of great people, kind of the same quality of folks that I met at Sidwell. Work-wise, it was not fun, but I think it just taught me this other way of like thinking and seeing the world that I really appreciate and that I use in my work now as a development professional. But it was really about, you know, working with Bryan Stevenson was really about that whole philosophy he has, that you are more than the worst thing that you've ever done. That is only a part of your story, and individuals, you know, they have some control, but there are a lot of things out of their control. So he really taught us to look at all the sort of structural and systemic factors that influence, you know, choices that people have in their lives or lack of choices. And it's something that I've really carried with me. He's a person that, you know, at that time, he's like a big superstar now. Everybody knows him. But at that time, unless you were, you know, in death penalty litigation, you didn't really know who he was. I just knew that he was this man who was doing this incredible work, that he was dedicating his life to, and he was going back and forth to Alabama, and he ran this clinic where he, you know, he would bring law students there for the semester, and you just kind of, you know, like you were 18 hours a day working on these cases. He very clearly told you, this is not about you, and it's not about your comfort. This is about the clients, and it's about fighting the system. So I think in writing this book, the way that he taught us to do mitigation histories for clients was very impactful, because for him it was, the narrative is everything. Yes, you need to know the law, and he taught us really the fine points of habeas law, but he was also like, you need to make this person a human being, and the system has rendered this person, you know, they have taken that humanity away from this person. So part of the process is giving it back and spending time with the family, really understanding like what struggles that they had, what, you know, were they hungry, were they homeless, did they have, you know, brain injury, what was happening in the school systems, everything. And, you know, he taught us too when we went to interview folks to kind of collect this mitigation history and kind of weave this story. He's like, look at everything. When you go into a house, look at where things are situated, look if there are signs of struggle, look and see if somebody is hoarding. Like there are all these clues about the person's psychology and like what's going on in their life. And he would even be like, record the way that people are dressed. What color were they wearing? You know, he did all these like exercises and role playings with us. And so I think, you know, it was a short time in my life, but it was really just the most intense, but the most wonderful and like most, I don't know, just the best thing that I've ever done. And it just has carried itself into the way that I see people, the way that I have relationships with people, the work that I'm doing now. I'm a storyteller as a development professional. And, you know, I try to use ethical storytelling where you're centering people. People are the heroes of their story. It's not, these people are suffering, now give them money. Like, here they are looking dejected, you know what I mean?
Yes. And that's something I will say, just hearing you, I mean, it's so compelling the way you speak about that time and that work in the book. And it's also so clear, as I'm sure you, as you just spoke to, how that way of looking at people also seems to have been a lens through which you were able to look at your own family. And I wonder if you want to talk about the process for you of writing about deeply personal things with that lens of, what struck me so much in the work is how honest, like unflinchingly honest it is, and or seems to me, and how compassionate. I don't know if you want to speak into that process for you when you're applying it to someone, obviously, that you're much closer to in your life than a client.
Yeah, I mean, I think for a time in my life, even though I sort of had this experience in my 20s, it's different when you try to apply that to your own family. So I was like not always successful as a young person, and I had a lot of anger, but particularly anger at my father. I really was numb for a long time because of, you know, some of the things that happened to us as children, or just the way that my mom was treated. I was very close to my mom. And if it weren't for my mom, I would not be doing any of this. She really was, my brother Johnny calls her the unsung hero of the family. And I'm going to try not to get emotional.
It's okay to get emotional.
But yeah, I think the process of writing the book gave me my father back in a way, because I can see him more clearly as a person of value and a person who went through his own struggles, a person who was abused, a person who didn't always make the best choices. But I understand more of the forces at work that shaped him and shaped his behavior. And I didn't want the book to feel vindictive or angry. And I'm very cognizant of how Black men are portrayed in this society. So, yes, you know, there was domestic abuse in my house, but I also wanted people to see that my dad really cared in his own way about being a father and being a good father. And he really did the best that he knew how to do. And I more understand just some of the anger and the bitterness that he had about the society that he lived in. To just not be treated as a person and to spend most of your years in that way, you know?
Mm-hmm. And you do such a beautiful job, in my humble opinion, of capturing that, and also of capturing the impact of inherited and ancestral and abusive trauma. You know, the passing on of abuse, both personal and systemic, that happens in a way that has so much compassion and honesty. And I also just want to say that I appreciate, you know, the emotion in it is so part of the courage. You know, to take that away would take away so much of the richness of what you share and the power of it. So I just want to also say, writer to writer, as someone who also writes from and about some sometimes painful personal histories with collective connections, that it does take a lot of courage to do that and to have that vulnerability. And I think reaches people more deeply because of it. I've felt that in your work so profoundly. And I wonder if maybe from there you want to talk a little bit about some of the artistic connections to Marvin Gaye, to Shakespeare, and how they inspired, impacted both your father and you, both in your life and in this work.
Yeah, so we both, my father and I both had our patron saints, basically. And I think I really got my love of literature and my love of reading from him. He was a huge reader, but he was strangely obsessed with Shakespeare. And I really did not understand it until I was in college. And he basically was like, yeah, what are you spending your time reading these other things? He would read the tragedies. He was really like rereading the tragedies, and he knew like the scenes and everything. And, you know, I still didn't understand it until now when I was writing the book, and I kind of went back to some of the texts, and I'm like, his life was like this really strange mashup of like King Lear, Othello, you know, Richard III. It was very strange. So I don't know if he was like reading it, trying to find clues, or like what was going on exactly. And I am very much into music. I have always loved Marvin Gaye. There's a funny Marvin Gaye story from our days in lower school at Sidwell, where we had to like dress up in these pillowcases with balloons in it. We were singing I Heard It Through the Grapevine. But it kind of started like my pillowcase tore, and I was afraid I was going to be naked on stage, but that's a whole other story. Trauma. Marvin Gaye came into my consciousness in 1984 because I remember my mom I tell this story in the book. I remember her taking me to Dale Music Store in Silver Spring, and she bought me the sheet music to the Diana Ross song when he was killed. And I was really trying to understand, like, why would this father kill his son? What was that about? And I just really, in high school, started listening to his music a lot, and would listen to the Howard University radio program that they did on his birthday every year. They would just not just play the music, but they would tell the story of his life. And I've done a lot of reading about him in recent years. And we have these like strange parallels, because besides the, struggle with his father, he was born the year before my mom was born. Grew up in DC. He had bought a house for his parents after he had success in Motown that was in the neighborhood where I grew up. And he also strangely grew up with some customs that were very related to Judaism, because his father was like a Pentecostal minister, but it was a very different form of the religion, and so they observed like the Saturday Sabbath, and for Passover they used to go to like these Jewish stores and buy matzah, and some of the Jewish merchants would look at the family like, what is going on? So he's had interviews where he's talked about this, and I don't know, I just believe that there is art that speaks to you and helps you to kind of funnel your own stories and to tell your own stories, and that I sort of found him for a reason, and he was this really important voice for me when I was going through a lot of turmoil and trouble during my semester in Alabama. It was his music that really kept me afloat.
Yeah, and that's something that you also write about so beautifully throughout, as a thread throughout the work. And you mentioned the sort of connection to Jewish culture, and I wonder if you want to talk a little bit about your own connection to an identity of being both Black and Jewish and mixed, and then how that maybe impacts the lens for you in the work, or in the way you approach the storytelling, or some of the ways we talked about and that you write about beautifully in the book around moving between worlds in a number of ways, right? Between private home life, between what people outside the home know, and then also looking at different economic strata that are both lived through your own family's journey and also represented in the circles that you move between. So anything in there that you want to speak to around kind of navigating between, or how that impacts the work?
So I've always felt like this kind of odd outsider in a way. I saw Colson Whitehead do a talk in Boston, and he called himself a Black weirdo, and sometimes I kind of feel like that myself, that I could sort of circulate in different, I could be in different circles, but I never really felt like of a circle. And I think some of that is because I spent a lot of time like betwixt and between, you know, I was between races. I identify as Black, but you know, obviously my upbringing is very different. You know, having a huge influence from my mother and her family. You know, she was first generation American too, so the immigrant experience felt particularly close. I had parents who were much older than most of my friends' parents. I had this very non-traditional family structure where I had, you know, my oldest sibling is in her 70s. I have a niece who's older than me. I could kind of go on and on. So I think because of that, and also being a younger child, I did a lot of like listening and observing in my life. But I think that's also good for like storytelling and for understanding people, understanding people's motivations, figuring things out. Yeah, so I don't know. I don't know if that quite answers your question, but I do have a short passage that relates that I could read about that. And this is actually about my mom. Part 3 of the book is my mom's part of the book, and it is short, but it's my favorite part. And so it's called Spirits in the Material World. My mother is often missing from my infant and toddler photographs because she was the one holding the camera. In one photograph in which she does appear, she looks like a stunning 1970 era Madonna with child. I am about a year old and newly walking. It is clearly summer because I am wearing nothing but a diaper and a mint green t-shirt. I have started to lose some of my roly-poly Buddha baby fat, but I still have small pinchable rolls. My mother is wearing a sleeveless flowered sundress in shades of blue with purple and yellow accents. Her long dark hair is tied back in a ponytail. She has the hint of a smile on her face, and her arms are outstretched as she bends to guide my tiny shoulders toward a white stone flower pot containing a bright red geranium. She will not let me fall. To me, this photo captures my mother's quiet confidence that someone or something was always watching over us, some spiritual or ancestral power. Whenever I came to her with my worries, anticipating the worst case scenario, she would tell me, things have a way of working themselves out. Cross that bridge when you get to it. And she was usually right. Simultaneously, and perhaps contradictorily, she had a dramatically dark vision of the world as being full of people with sinister motives. Faith and fear, those were the two pole stars of her existence. She did not trust in the good side of human nature, especially when it came to the most vulnerable human beings, children. She warned me about child molesters before I could even properly pronounce the word. Prior to speech therapy, I called them child molesters, or understand that they did more than just abduct children. Instead, my mother trusted her own intuition, which was so finely tuned that she frequently experienced premonitions. I'm a witch, she would playfully claim. When I think of someone, they call or show up. And it was true. She would mention some random person, such as one of her coworkers from decades ago, and out of the blue that person would call. Or she would dream about my paternal grandmother wearing black and some illness or other misfortune would befall someone close to us. She also claimed to see and feel spirits. Her deceased mother, Sylvia, tapping her on the shoulder while she tended her roses and panties, Or Sylvia sending a sign by making the lilac tree blooms in a shower of delicate buds after years of dormant bare branches. My mother taught me that the antidote for the evil eye, essentially a concentrated form of envy directed at a person's good fortune, is to say the Jewish word kanahara while spitting 3 times over the shoulder in case the word alone did not suffice. She warned me not to cut my toenails and fingernails on the same day because that is the Jewish ritual for preparing dead bodies.
Oh.
She admonished me not to let anyone step over me for it would stunt my growth. My childhood was vastly different from the rigidly Catholic upbringing of my brothers and sisters. Although I never attended Hebrew school or synagogue regularly, I imbibed all the folk culture of old world European Jewry, along with 7 years of Catholic Mass and communion. But when I changed schools and as my father became more disillusioned with Catholic dogma, especially with regard to divorce, I absorbed more and more of my mom's cultural Judaism. This was natural given that she was the person I felt closest to, and her own family was so diminished. She always told me if a mother is Jewish, so is her child. So I began to identify as Jewish as well as Black. My mother's conception of the world was undoubtedly driven by her grandparents' Orthodox beliefs, her coming of age during the war against Nazi Germany, and the Old Testament God. A God who is alternately vengeful and vain, yet loyal upon demonstrated fealty, and therefore much more human and flawed. This God didn't turn the other cheek, and he could be relentlessly cruel, but he did not abandon his chosen people. This was analogous to the shadowy, dangerous world she and I inhabited alongside my father. All the same, I demonstrated an early skepticism about my mother's faith. One day we were at the mall and she was trying to lift both 3-year-old me and my stroller onto the escalator. Somehow she cut her ankle and I looked down to see drops of blood blooming like a bright scarlet poppy beneath her pantyhose. Thank goodness, God was with us, she said with relief. I didn't see God, Mom, I responded. It was just me and you.
Follow that. I was just gonna say, an honoring of how you have taken some profound grief and turned it into such beautiful writing and storytelling and sharing through this work. I learned so much through it, not just about you, but about so many other things. And I wonder if you are open to a few questions if folks have them now. Maybe we move into that before I ask you a couple more. Are there questions that people have from what you've heard so far, or for those who've read the book? Anything you want to ask Johnisha while we have her here?
Yes,
Oh,
the
sorry,
gentleman
yes.
in the front.
Not read it yet, but it is my second book I bought. Okay. But the title, with the title, can you explain what it is? I think I kind of know.
Good question.
Yes, we did talk about that.
Okay, yeah, so the original title of the book was supposed to be Speak of Me as I Am, Cracking the Code of an American Family, so that was going to be a reference to Othello and the epigraph I have there, because I felt like that was really sort of my vision for the book, in the honesty, you know, being able to talk about these things, that being able to let go of secrets. But publisher was like, that is not going to work. So they changed it to Numbers Up, but you know, I can understand Numbers Up because it's kind of like, this is the time, and the reference to the street numbers that my dad worked in. But the cracking the code was really important for me to keep, because the code in the book is a lot of things. The code is the code of silence and secrecy. It's also my dad was a naval radioman in World War II, so it's Morse code. It's also then coded communications with, you know, how he operated his numbers business. And then it's also code switching, which I had to do between these two different worlds of, you know, going to an elite private school, but then also just kind of having like an unconventional way of, you know, my parents earning their living that I can talk about.
I saw a hand in the back.
Yes, congratulations.
Thank
on
you.
the
Oh, it's
publishing
good
of
to
your
see
book.
you.
Yes, we went to college together, and I am so excited because over the years I remember you posting about writing the book and editing the book, and so congratulations to you. My question is if you could share more about your process, like how did you go about weaving all of these facts into a story that clearly, like, it's not just an autobiography, it really is a memoir, and it's weaving in other aspects. So I'd love to hear more about your process.
Yeah, so my process was
Can everyone still hear? Just doing a check. No, okay, good. Go ahead.
not straightforward because obviously I haven't written a book before, and I'm also not, I mean, I've done like a little freelancing here or there, but it's not really, you know, outside of being a lawyer and development work. I'm not, you know, doing a lot of creative writing these days. And I really just kind of had to start with a more chronological telling of my life. And it started without the structure that I have in terms of like the 3 parts of the book, where it's, you know, my father, me, and then my mother. But I think I had to do that to get to the place where, you know, it was kind of like more biography in the beginning, or autobiography. And then it was like, okay, how do I take this one episode or situation in the family, and what do I start carving away to really highlight that? So there was a lot of stuff that I wrote that it kind of hurt to get rid of, but you know, maybe I repurposed it for something else, I don't know. And so the book really just got like whittled down. I was pretty committed to the writing process. I did write every weekend that I can remember. I did, sometimes I would work on like revisions during the week, like after work, but I really couldn't do like new writing during the week because I really had to have like a clear head for it. Another thing that was really important, given the part of the book that talks about the legal case with my dad, I had to create a timeline for that because it was really complicated, and I was like, I don't really know that there are still some holes because I couldn't get all of the legal files that I wanted, and I also didn't think that a lot of the details would necessarily be relevant, so that helped me kind of like focus that part of the book. Trying to think what else I can talk about, say about my process. I also found it very helpful to keep like a notebook by the bed, because randomly I would have these, you know, I'd like wake up or I'd be about to fall asleep, and just like even like a phrase or an idea would come to me, and it was just too hard to, you know, I wasn't gonna remember them, you know, the next hour. I have a terrible memory for some things like that. So I just kind of kept that close to me, and then I could go back to it and be like, oh, this is garbage, or oh, this could actually like work, and I could incorporate it.
You also talk about the role of documentation and sort of those those things that you found in creating the work. And I'm wondering, in relation to what how do you take care of yourself as a writer in writing about things that are personal? And like, is there something in your process that helped you to process what you were writing about, or was the process itself healing enough? I'm just curious.
Yeah, yes and no. The process in some ways was healing, but I also had to do things like be kind to myself, and I felt like something was getting a little bit too intense, give myself permission to step away from it, or like do something else, take a walk. Sometimes that was a good way to, or good, period to go through and do revisions or edits, because then you didn't have to do the work of creating, writing those painful memories. They were just kind of, or you could do research. Like, I love research, so I was like, oh, I'm just gonna go down a rabbit hole on this thing. I'm gonna look up the, news articles or something about this topic. So I felt like I could kind of move things along, but if it really wasn't feeling like the right time to get into some of the stuff I was discussing, that was just okay to not.
Yes. So important. Other questions from folks? Yeah.
Hi, Johnisha. I'm confused.
Hello.
My question is there something that was surprising or revealing or just really cool that you didn't expect to experience or to learn about yourself, either while you were, writing this novel, or even on the other side of it, now that it's published and you're kind of like reflecting on your experience? Is there just something that you would say was really surprising, shocking, or cool that you experienced about yourself?
Good question. I think I would say that I'm more persistent than I realized. It was a really long process. Actually the stuff that happened after writing the book was in some ways more challenging than the writing itself. And I just didn't anticipate like how difficult it was gonna be. So it kind of taught me that, when I'm really committed and like dogged about something, I'm just gonna like go for it. And I don't know, it may really be the first time that I'm a dabbler in life. Like I just like, even with, professional and career stuff, I feel like I have a lot of interest, and sometimes I get just, I go on another path. I don't like stay in one lane. So it was nice to actually have a project and to be able to see it through to completion like this, and to really just like focus and
Can you hear me?
yes.
Okay. Hey, my name is Betty. We talked on Instagram.
Yes, I recognize you. Thanks.
I really
for coming.
enjoyed the book. I had a question. I feel like at the beginning of the book, when you're talking about the story with your father, it really shows homage to DC and like Black culture in DC pre-gentrification, even in talking about the numbers game and how it provided a way for Black families to take care of themselves and each other. And I told you, I didn't even know. I worked near Dunbar. I had no idea it was the first Black high school in the country. And I was wondering, like, was that intentional to really talk deeply and like show that appreciation for DC and its resilience of Black families and Black culture? Or was it kind of just naturally what happened because, you and your family are essentially inseparable from DC?
Yeah, I mean, it was very intentional. I haven't lived in the city for a long time. And, I've been sort of in the last few years have come for short trips, and I get this almost like culture shock especially when I go to U Street. I mean, U Street is such a hub of, it was such a central part of, you know, how I conceive of DC and understand DC, and that world is actually pretty close to disappearing. I mean, there's still like a few, you know, kind of holdouts or people who are keeping the culture alive, you know, especially like the Ali family. And I just wanted, I wanted to pay tribute to like that rich culture, and, you know, just some of the stories that my dad would tell me, be like, oh yeah, and, you know, I was around, and like, you know, this entertainer would come, like Cab Calloway, or, you know, just like name drop all these, you know, black celebrities from back in the day, or Billie Holiday, and just to like think about him rubbing elbows with these people, but there was just this real intimacy, and I think people really cared for each other, they really knew each other, they really looked out for each other, and a lot of that is, you know, gentrification has changed a lot of that, so yeah, I mean, it's kind of like preserving some of that is really important.
And I'm really glad you brought that up, because that does feel like such an important part of the book too, and what you do in that preservation. And, you know, as someone who wasn't as familiar with that neighborhood or history growing up, you know, that just felt like something that is really important that the book does as well in the process.
Johnisha, you mentioned in the acknowledgments at the end, working with the Smithsonian's Museum of African American History to trace your genealogy in Charles County, Plata.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if you could talk a bit about the process of working with whoever you worked with there, and whether there were things you discovered that maybe you chose just not to include in the book. Sort of a deeper understanding of your family.
Yeah, so I did a little work around this one. I didn't get too like deep into genealogy, although at some point I would like to. Some years back before I wrote this, I was kind of doing some exploration, and I hit a wall with my dad's great grandfather, Seymour Sims, who was the man who raised him, because there was basically a transcription error in the census. You know how they like kind of type the names out? So if you're looking in Ancestry and you see that, it looks like he essentially disappeared like before he was 40, and I was like, where is this man? I know he's from this area, but he was coming up as like Lemuel something or other, because they had transcribed the S as an L and some other things, and then, you know, of course there's a lot of inconsistencies with birthdays and such in African American genealogical documentation. And so I really was feeling kind of like hopeless about that, but that was in like 2000, I want to say like maybe 2013, 2014. I was like, oh, I guess I'm just not going to get anywhere with this. But then I contacted the museum because I had read this piece in the New Yorker called Manhunt, and it was about John Wilkes Booth. And I think it was written around the Apple TV series, but it kind of did this deep dive into, you know, the trial and this formerly enslaved woman named Mary Sims, who had testified and helped convict Dr. Mudd. And I was like, Mary Sims, that's my great grandfather's name. And she was from Bryantown, which is pretty close to where my dad grew up. So I went to them and I really wanted to just find out, are we related or not? I don't think we are, but that because of that, this woman, Lisa Crawley, one of the researchers who specializes in like Maryland history, she was actually able to bring me back a generation to the enslaved parents of Seymour Sims, and they're who I dedicated the book to, Martha Flemons and Frederick Sims. And I really had this like eerie feeling because all this time, Frederick and Martha were almost there before me, because I knew that my grandmother's siblings were, she had siblings named Frederick and Martha. She came from a very large family. And so I'm like, wow, okay, so he named his children after his parents, and these are the enslaved people that I couldn't find all this time. And we really had to do this very, I can't even describe how we backtracked it, because it basically started with like her saying, wow, your whole family disappears from Charles County around the 1940s, and we had to find my grandmother in DC. And then from there we found my grandmother was living with her sister, and her sister disappeared because I think it was one of the sisters who died young, but my grandmother was living with her niece, the sister's young daughter, who was orphaned. And all these sort of, it was very like circular and whatever, but we basically worked our way back through to finding his parents.
It is an extraordinary part of the book, the amount of research that you can feel but then never feels heavy. Like it just feels so embedded in all the stories in such a beautiful way.
If anybody's interested, I have some like I have some of that stuff in the end notes, because I didn't know how to like incorporate it without kind of breaking up the story too much. But there are some like tiny little stories in the end notes.
Yeah. And speaking of end notes, I know that we should be closing soon. I just wanted to ask, anything you want to say about telling this story in this time? Anything that's shifted for you between when you sort of started the process of writing it and now that it's out in the world?
Yeah, so I started the process during the so-called racial reckoning. That wasn't a racial reckoning. And I laugh, but it's really painful, because we're living in this time where, you know, basically the narratives are so important, and who is able to tell a story is so important, especially, you know, in just like affecting political change. It's discourse. Discourse is so important when you change the culture and you change the values and you change the way that everyday people talk about an issue. You know, you see that with something like gay marriage originally. And so now we have, I'm really depressed and hopeless, but at the same time, this is the last few years I've been celebrating the amount of Black stories that are being told in different forms of media, and just like finally being being able to see yourself and to see families. I mean, even stuff like, okay, I don't know if you all have seen Forever, the adaptation of the Judy Blume novel. Okay, seeing young black love like that, like, it just is so incredible. And so we're just finally like getting to that point where, okay, yes, we can tell the stories, and we have our people like, you know, Ryan Coogler and Sinners, which I could talk about forever. But there is a lot of power in that, and there are people who don't want us to have that power. And we're finally, you know, able to have the tools, even with the genealogical research. You know, they did everything to obscure that history, and the whole, you know, movement to tell American history through a race lens, to critique, you know, race capitalism in this country. It scares the people in power so much. So we're seeing this real crackdown. So I'm thinking of this story, and I'm also thinking of like the changing complexion of DC, and not just the complexion, but the politics of the city. And so, yeah, I don't know, I feel a responsibility. I feel like it's just it's a strange time, and it's like I have to figure out how do I get that message out, and how can I be useful, you know, when we're facing this moment.
I don't pretend to have that answer, except that I will say that to me, just reading this feels incredibly useful, and just what you're putting into the world in this moment feels even more important than ever, for all the reasons you're saying. So I feel like you can take a breath and say, I did something quite powerful already. And what are you working on next? Is there, what's kind of holding you these days?
So I have an idea for a nonfiction book about a certain institution that is heavily featured in this book, but yeah, I need to be able to find like the headspace and the time to do it, so it probably won't be in the coming months, but maybe by next year.
Okay, all right. Well, where can people learn more about your work? Is that readily available here? Should we do a little website? Johnisha Matthews Levi, am I saying it right?
Yeah.
.com. So I just want to put that out there, and you'll be staying to sign some books and talk to folks, I assume. Yeah. Thank you so much, Johnisha, for your beautiful work. Thank you all. Thank you,